Okay, let's talk about a term you hear all the time, from the news to your macroeconomics class, GDP. It's always thrown around like it's the most important number for a country's economy, but what does it actually mean? Let's break it down.
Whoa, just look at this number. We're talking over $25 trillion. There was the gross domestic product of the US back in 2022. I mean, it's a completely mind-boggling figure that's supposed to be the price tag for an entire country's economic output for a whole year.
So the big question is, how on earth do you even calculate a number that massive? What gets counted? What gets left on the cutting room floor? And what does this one giant number really tell us about how a country is doing? Well, that's what we're going to find out.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll get the official definition down. Then, we'll dig into the very specific rules for what makes the cut. After that, we'll check out the 3 different ways to calculate it, explore the super important difference between real and nominal GDP, and finally, we'll ask the big one. Is this number the whole story?
Okay, first things first, let's get that official textbook definition. If you're taking notes for class, this is definitely one you're going to want to write down.
So, gross domestic product is the total production of new goods and services in an economy during a particular period. Now, trust me, every single word in that definition is there for a reason, especially new and particular period. Let's dig into why.
This brings us to the rules of the game. See, you can't just add up every dollar that changes hands. Economists have a really specific checklist for what actually makes it into that final GDP number.
Here are the 4 big ones. First, it has to be newly produced. So no, selling your used car doesn't count. Second, we only count final goods, not all the little parts that go into them. Third, it has to be produced inside the country's borders. And fourth, it's all measured in a specific window of time, usually a quarter or a full year.
Let's really zoom in on that final good rule, because this one is critical. Think about a brand new bicycle in a store. That's a final good. But the tires, the frame, the gears, those are intermediate goods. Now, if we counted the price of the tires and then also counted the full price of the bike, we'd be counting the tires twice. So to avoid that double counting, GDP only looks at the price of the finished bike.
Okay, but how do you add a bicycle to a haircut? Or a smoothie to financial advice? You can't just say, well, we made 5 smoothies and 3 milkshakes. It doesn't work. The solution is to find a common language, and that language is money. We use the market price, the dollar value of everything, and then we can add it all together.
And here's another key distinction, especially for your class, the idea of stocks versus flows. Think of it like this. The total number of cars that exist in the US right now, that's a stock. It's a snapshot. But the number of new cars that were built this year, that's a flow. GDP is all about the flow. It measures the new stuff being added to the economy.
So we know the rules, but how do economists actually do the math? Well, what's really cool is that there are actually 3 different ways to go about it. And in theory, all 3 should get you to the exact same number. You can add up all the spending on stuff, or you can add up all the income people earned from making that stuff, or you can add up the total value of the stuff itself. And that makes sense, right? Every dollar you spend becomes a dollar of income for someone else. It's a big circle, so all 3 methods should match up.
Now, the most common way to do it, and this is the one you will absolutely 100% see on your exams, is the spending approach. It comes with this legendary formula Y equals C plus I plus G plus X. So let's break down what those letters actually stand for.
All right, C is for consumption. That's just regular people buying stuff, like a new laptop or a coffee. I is for investment. This is businesses building a new factory or buying new computers. G is for government purchases, think building a new highway or paying for defense. And finally, X is for net exports, which is simply the stuff we sell to other countries minus the stuff we buy from them. But hang on, there's a huge plot twist here. Imagine if overnight, the price of literally everything in the country doubled. Well, the GDP number would also double. But would we actually be better off? Are we producing more? Nope. And this is exactly why we need to talk about real versus nominal GDP.
So, nominal GDP is calculated using today's prices. That means if prices go up, inflation, nominal GDP goes up too, even if we made the exact same amount of stuff. To get the real story, economists use real GDP. It basically freezes prices in a base year to strip out the effects of inflation and show if we actually produced more. Let's look at a quick example. In this little economy, from 2021 to 2022, we produced more books and smoothies, but their prices also went up.
Now, look at the nominal GDP. It jumped from 5 grand to over 7 grand. But the real GDP, which sticks with the old 2021 prices, only grew to $5,700. See? That lower number gives us the true picture of how much more we actually made.
So how do we actually measure that overall price change? Well, we use something called the GDP deflator. It's a pretty simple formula. You just take the nominal GDP and divide it by the real GDP. That gives you a direct measure of how much prices have changed across the whole economy.
And here's what that looks like in the real world. This chart compares inflation from the GDP deflator with the more famous one, the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. And you can see that while they're not identical twins, those two lines pretty much tell the same story about inflation over the last few decades.
Okay, so we've spent all this time getting our heads around this one single number. But now for the really big question. Is a country's GDP the ultimate report card for its success?
And the short answer is no. GDP has some major blind spots. It totally misses the underground economy, all the cash transactions and work that isn't reported. And it also doesn't count any of the incredibly valuable work that gets done in the home, like childcare.
And this is not a small problem. I mean, look at these numbers. The underground economy could be about 10% of GDP in the US. But in a country like Peru, it might be over 40%. That is a huge slice of economic activity that GDP just pretends isn't there.
And maybe even more importantly, GDP tells us absolutely nothing about the things that really make for a good life. It doesn't measure how healthy we are, how safe we feel, or the quality of our environment. It can't tell you how much free time we have. A rising GDP does not automatically mean life is getting better. So, to wrap it up, GDP is an absolutely essential tool for understanding the economy. But that's what it is, a tool. It's fantastic at measuring production, but it's not a measure of progress or happiness. And that leaves us with a final thought, a question for you. If you couldn't use GDP, what single number would you use to measure a country's success?